Hello, it's Deborah from Attic Lane, and today I want to share 3 cards I've made using a recent release from My Favourite Things. It's called Adorned Ocean Friends, and it's a very pretty stamp because you get background fish silhouettes and then beautiful detailed stamps to layer on top of these base sizes. The stamps are clearly marked out which ones match with which of the little delicate layering, and there are also some underwater plants that you can use to add interest to your card. So I've made 3 cards using these stamps and also using some little fish stamps from another stamp set from My Favourite Things called Mermazing. This was released I think last year. And I also am going to share with you a lovely little trick, again using some laminating pouches to show how you can make a sort of a little underwater bubbly sort of cover for your card. So let's get started with card 1. For card 1, I'm starting with my stamping platform. I've got a piece of white card ready and I'm going to use this silhouette of a fish. I'm marking the centre of my white card so that I can position my fish exactly where I want it to be, because I'm going to do a mirror image. I've got some archival ink and in just a light yellow, and then I've got an orangey Versacolour ink, and I'm going to use the yellow ink to cover the whole of the fish and then squeeze it onto my platform. And then I'm going to run around just the outside of the fish silhouette with the slightly darker orangey colour, because this will help give my fish a slightly better defined outline. It also gives a really nice colour variation. You might have to do this 2 or 3 times until you're happy with the ink coverage on your card, but just keep going until you're happy with it. And here you can see I need to fill in a little bit more in the centre of my fish, so I'm just repeat stamping. And you can keep on adding your layers as you like. Now I've positioned the silhouette opposite the first one that I did, and this is why I had to mark the centre of my card. I'm inking this up in exactly the same way as I did with the first fish. I've got my filigree pattern to go on the top, and I've positioned this on my stamping platform, and I'm going to ink it up with a plain black Versacolour ink. I think that gives a stunning effect. Really beautiful with the black on the yellow. Now I'm doing the same on the other side. This time I have to be careful that because I've turned the filigree upside down, I have to be careful not to ink and stamp the little eye. So I've covered it over with a tiny piece of paper. It's a little bit fiddly, but it can be done. So I'm covering it over with paper, I'm inking up the rest of the stamp, then I can remove my white piece of paper, and when I stamp the filigree image on top of the base image, the little eye won't come out, because if it had come out it would have been upside down. So there's nothing there, and all I need to do now is take a 0.1 size pen, little narrow nib black pen, and draw in the eye where it should be. That way it looks as if the fish are both the right way up, and you haven't got one upside down. I'm using a pad from My Favourite Things, and I've cut off a line of this really effective black and white striped paper to go on the bottom of my white card. I've glued that in place, and I'm just trimming off the edges where it overhangs. I print out sentiments that I like on a sheet of paper, and then I cut them out as needed. And this time I've decided to cut out a little phrase that says, "Together any fin is possible." It's a really bad pun. And I've cut 2 little fishtail ends into that, and I can glue it into position. I'm using my ribbon now to remove the pencil mark I made when I was centering my card. I've got a yellow side folding card, and I'm going to glue the top design onto that card. I'm using my tape runner in the hope that I will position this accurately and I won't need to move it around. Now that my card design is complete, I'm going to show you another way to enhance a card using a laminated pouch. These are small laminated pouches, they're half of an A4 sheet, and I'm going to take one of these sheets and I'm going to run it through one of my embossing folders. This has got little dots on it, and I think the little dots will be quite sweet to represent bubbles under the sea. This is how it looks when it's been run through the embossing machine, and you can see how beautifully it picks up the bubbles. I'm using the side that is non-shiny. You have a choice, you can use the shiny side or the dull side, and I'm using the dull side because I don't want this to glare at you under the lights. So I run my tape runner along the top, I glue it into position on the top of the card, I trim the card down, and with that my card is finished. And that gives it a really different effect. For my second card, I'm using a piece of watercolour paper, which I've cut down to size, and I'm smushing 2 of the Distress Oxide inks onto one of my acrylic blocks. I'm going to mix these up with some mica spray. This is a pearl mica spray, and I'll provide a link to all of these items under the video. Now I position my watercolour card on the top of that smooshed up ink, and I'm going to weigh it down with a little bottle and leave it for a moment or two. And when it's finished and I lift it off, you can see how beautiful the effect of the ink and the mica spray is when they work together. Now bear with me on this because I did get myself in a bit of a pickle when I was editing. I'm now using craft foam to back a fish that I've coloured up in exactly the same way as I did for the yellow fish on our first card. The craft foam will give my fish extra dimension, and because it's so easy to cut, you can cut it to almost any size and shape that fits your project. This is the finished card. I've used these inks to go in the centre of the fish and then around the outside edge, exactly as we did with the first, and I've used little fishes from another stamp set by My Favourite Things just to colour in the background a little bit, and I've added a sentiment at the bottom. For card 3, I've used pink and then pretty pink to colour the fish in exactly the same way as we did before. So you cover the whole of the background of the fish and then you go around the outside edge with the darker colour. I'm now embossing on the top of this with Versamark watermark ink because I'm going to emboss this with a lovely blue steel embossing powder from Simon Says Stamp. I'm going to take some time to heat this up under the camera so you can see the transformation, because usually when you talk to crafters, this is the magic. It's when an embossing powder changes and melts and becomes part of the design, and this is always the thing that gets paper crafters giddy. I still get excited about it. I think it's wonderful, and you can see the effect there as I twist it under the lights. Now I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to create another background using the same Distress Oxide inks. I'm using a slightly different technique. I'm using my craft mat because this is going to get a little bit messy, and I'm just spritzing with some plain water. Now I'm using a little of the mica spray to add that lovely shimmer that we had before. I've got 2 lengths of paper, white paper, and I'm just going to roll them through the centre of those inks so that they pick up a different part of the colour of the inks on the craft sheet. I'm going to spritz them with a little bit of mica spray to give them a little bit more of a silvery effect, and I'm going to keep adding to the pattern as I think is necessary. So where the paper is maybe a little bit plain, I can add either a little bit of mica or a little bit more ink from my craft mat, and then when I'm happy with the colour, I'll set it by drying it with my heat gun. Then I can add more layers and dry them as I go. I'm going to do this with the 2 pieces of card just so that I have lots of choices when I come to make my final card. Now I have some titanium white acrylic paint, and I've spritzed some water into that to loosen it a little, and I'm taking a splatter paint brush and I'm just splattering dots onto my bluey green sort of sea coloured background. I've set that aside to dry, and now I've moved on to one of the weedy pieces from the stamp set, and I'm using 2 different colours of ink again to add interest to this stamp, and I'm going in for a little close-up here to try and give you a better view of the impact that it has when it's on the sheet. You have to build it up. It begins quite lightly because these are light coloured inks, but as you build up the layers and as you add more and more, and you might have to do this 4 or 5 or even 6 times on a stamp, it doesn't matter, you just keep going until you get the effect that you like. And then I've cut this out using my craft knife. This is another fish that I've done using these 2 colours, which again I'll link to below. And I've embossed again using blue embossing powder. I've taken one of my blue backgrounds and I've cut it down and I've glued it onto a white side folding card, and now I'm going to add all the other elements of my design, starting with my weedy plant. I don't know what to call it, but my weedy plant that I've just stamped and cut out. And then I'm going to position my fish. I'm going to get my craft foam again that I used in the previous card that we made, and I'm going to glue it, little patches of it, onto the back of one of my fish, so that one fish will be glued directly onto the card below, and one fish will have a little bit of dimension, a little bit of lift from the craft foam. I'm selecting another of my badly punned sentiments. I think this one says, "Sending you happy birthday, fishes." And I'm going to cut this down. I want to make sure that this is going to fit in that bottom right corner on my beautifully painted card background. And so I'm just moving my fish around to make sure there's plenty of space for that sentiment to be added. When they're glued down and my sentiment is cut and glued in place, my card is complete. I shall say thank you very much for your time, thank you for joining me, and I hope we'll meet again soon for our next project, and in the meantime, take care.